In the heart of London, in a restaurant where fortunes are discussed over champagne, one table remained an enigma. Every night, the world's most reclusive billionaire, Alexei Volkov, would sit in absolute silence. He never finished his meal. He never spoke a word. And every night, he would leave behind a perfect, priceless miniature egg that sent whispers through the city's elite. The media called him a ghost, an oligarch losing his mind. His rivals saw him as a wounded animal ready to be devoured. They all thought they knew his story. But they knew nothing, and no one could have predicted that the key to unlocking the soul of this broken man wasn't a psychologist or a business partner, but a 24-year-old waitress with tired eyes and a secret of her own. The air in Le Ciel Étoilé, a Michelin-starred sanctuary nestled in London's Mayfair, was thick with the scent of money and truffles. Conversations were murmured, deals were sealed with the subtle clink of crystal glasses, and the staff moved with the silent, rehearsed grace of ballet dancers. Yet every evening, at precisely 8:00 p.m., a different kind of performance began, one that silenced even the most boisterous patrons. This was when Alexei Volkov arrived. He wasn't just wealthy, he was a phantom, a myth whispered on trading floors from London to Hong Kong. The head of Volkov Industries, a sprawling empire of rare earth minerals and cutting-edge technology, he was a man who could shift global markets with a single rumored phone call. The financial press had nicknamed him the Siberian Wolf, a predator who had emerged from the post-Soviet chaos with an empire and an impenetrable armor of cold indifference. He was photographed, rarely interviewed, never. His only public appearance was this nightly ritual. His bodyguard, a mountain of a man named Ivan, with a face like a block of granite, would enter, first scanning the room with eyes that missed nothing. He would nod once to the maître d'Julian, who knew the drill by heart. Table 12, in the most secluded alcove, was always waiting. Then Alexei would enter, tall and severe with sharp cheekbones and eyes the color of a winter storm. He moved with an unnerving stillness. He wore bespoke suits from Savile Row that seemed to absorb the light around him, making him appear darker, more substantial than anyone else in the room. He would sit, unfold his napkin, and stare out the panoramic window at the London skyline, his expression a perfect, unreadable mask. The order was always the same. He never spoke it. Julian would simply nod to the kitchen, and a single bowl of rich crimson borscht with a side of black bread would be delivered. Alexei would lift the spoon, take exactly 3 sips, and then set it down. He would break off one small piece of bread, but never eat it. For the next hour he would sit in absolute, unnerving silence, his food growing cold in front of him. The staff had a betting pool on whether he would ever finish the bowl. No one had ever won. But the true mystery, the part that fueled gossip columns and baffled the city's elite, came at the end. After an hour had passed, Alexei would reach into his breast pocket and place a small, exquisitely crafted object on the white tablecloth next to his untouched plate. It was always a miniature egg, no bigger than a quail's egg made of enamel, precious metals and tiny jewels. Each night it was a different design, one shimmering with sapphire blue and diamond stars, another a delicate lattice of rose gold. Then he would stand, and without a backward glance, walk out. Ivan would settle the bill always in cash, always with a tip that could cover a junior waiter's rent for 3 months, and follow him into the night. The eggs were collected by Julian and stored in a safe. They were rumored to be miniature replicas of the legendary imperial eggs created by the House of Fabergé for the Russian Tsars. Each one was a masterpiece, worth a small fortune. No one knew why he left them. Was it a show of obscene wealth, a sign of eccentricity bordering on madness? His business rivals, like the notoriously aggressive American hedge fund manager, Andrew Paul, saw it as proof that the great Alexei Volkov was finally cracking under the pressure. Paul's firm Apex Acquisitions had been circling Volkov Industries for months, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. This bizarre ritual was the ammunition they needed. "He's lost it," Paul would sneer to his associates. "The man is having a breakdown in public. It's time to put the wolf out of his misery." The staff of Le Ciel Étoilé simply saw it as part of the job. They cleaned the table, collected the egg and reset for the next day, never daring to ask questions. To them, Alexei Volkov was not a man but a strange and lucrative phenomenon, a ghost who paid his bills. No one saw the profound, suffocating grief that drove him. No one could. They had no idea that this silent ritual was the only thing holding him together, and they certainly didn't know that the one person in all of London who held the key to his silent world was about to start her shift. Camilla Jensen tied the knot on her crisp black apron and took a deep, steadying breath. The reflection in the polished steel of the kitchen door showed a young woman with fatigue hiding in the corners of her intelligent blue eyes. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe bun, a stark contrast to the cascade of curls she preferred on her days off. At 24, she felt closer to 40. Camilla was not meant to be a waitress. She was by passion and education an art historian. Her mind was a library filled with the brushstrokes of Monet, the anguish of Goya, and the opulent secrets of the Russian imperial court. Her master's thesis, which sat half-finished on her laptop in her tiny flat, was a deep dive into the symbolic language of Peter Carl Fabergé's work for Tsar Nicholas II and his family. She could tell you the story behind every diamond, the meaning of every enameled flower. But passion doesn't pay London rent or the mountain of student debt she'd accrued. So by night she traded her textbooks for a tray and her academic analysis for taking orders on overpriced sea bass. Le Ciel Étoilé was a top-tier post, the kind of job that could clear her debts in a few years, if she could stomach the demanding clientele and the crushing hours. On her third week, she was finally deemed competent enough to serve the tables in the main dining room. Julian, the manager, pulled her aside, his voice a low conspiratorial whisper. "Table 12, he said, his eyes flicking towards the empty alcove. "It is Mr. Volkov's table. Your job is to be invisible. You deliver the borscht. You clear the borscht. You do not speak unless spoken to, which he will not. You do not make eye contact. You do not react to anything. Are we clear, Paul?" "Perfectly, Yatsate," Camilla said, her voice betraying none of the curiosity that piqued within her. She had already heard the whispers, the legends of the silent Russian billionaire and his bizarre nightly offering. That evening she watched the ritual unfold. The arrival of the bodyguard, the entrance of the man who seemed to carry his own personal winter around him. She watched as he sat, his face a mask of stone. When the order was ready, she carried the heavy porcelain bowl with steady hands, her heart thumping a nervous rhythm against her ribs. As she placed the bowl on the table, her professional training took over. She was quiet, efficient, invisible, but she couldn't help but steal a glance. His eyes weren't focused on the London skyline, she realized. They were unfocused, looking inward, lost in a landscape no one else could see. There was no arrogance in his posture, no sense of power. There was only an emptiness so profound it felt like a physical force. It wasn't coldness. It was the absolute zero of grief. An hour later, as instructed, she watched from a distance as he placed the small, glittering object on the table and departed. After Ivan had settled the bill, Julian nodded at her. "Clear table 12. Camilla. With a sense of trepidation, she approached. There beside the cold soup sat the egg. It wasn't just a pretty trinket. Camilla's breath caught in her throat. Her academic mind, the part of her that was truly alive, instantly took over. It was an exquisite replica of the lilies of the valley, one of the most famous imperial eggs. She knew its history intimately. It was a gift from Tsar Nicholas II to his wife, the Empress Alexandra Fyodorovna, in 1898. The original, crafted from pink enamel and pearls, was a celebration of their love and their young daughters. The lilies, a symbol of purity and innocence, were a tribute to them. The portraits of the Tsar and his two eldest daughters, Olga and Tatiana, would pop up from the top when a button was turned. It was a masterpiece, not of wealth, but of love, of family. Camilla stared at the miniature. The detail was perfect. The tiny seed pearls, the faint blush of the enamel. This wasn't a random display of opulence. This was a message, a story. And suddenly, Alexei Volkov wasn't the Siberian wolf. He was a man leaving a symbol of profound domestic happiness on an empty table for one. That night, Camilla didn't sleep. She went home and dug out her research. She bypassed the sensational articles from Forbes and the Wall Street Journal and dove into obscure archives. It took her hours chasing whispers and dead ends, but she finally found it, a small, overlooked article from a Swiss newspaper dated 7 years prior. The headline was simple: Tragedy on Lake Geneva. The story detailed a horrific car accident on a winding mountain road. A limousine had skidded on black ice and plunged into the ravine. Among the victims were Elena Volkov, 34, and their daughter Anya Volkov, aged 8. The sole survivor, pulled from the wreckage with critical injuries, was the husband and father, Alexei Volkov. The article included a small, grainy photo. It was of a smiling Alexei, years younger, his arm around a beautiful woman with kind eyes. In front of them stood a little girl with a bright, gap-toothed smile, clutching a picture book. Camilla zoomed in on the book's cover. It was a children's book about the treasures of the Russian Tsars. Camilla leaned back, the glow of the laptop illuminating her face. Everything clicked into place with a sickening, heartbreaking clarity. The borscht, a taste of home, of childhood. The silence, the sound of a world without their voices. And the eggs. The eggs were for Anya, his little girl who loved the stories of the Tsars. This wasn't a ritual of madness. It was a ritual of remembrance, a desperate nightly attempt to have dinner with his family. Camilla's heart ached. The mystery was solved, but the truth was a weight far heavier than any puzzle. She now understood the Russian billionaire. But what could she, a waitress, possibly do with such a devastating truth? For the next 2 weeks, Camilla served table 12 with a new, painful understanding. She was no longer just a waitress delivering a bowl of soup. She felt like a silent accomplice to a man's private memorial. The other waiters saw a cold, eccentric billionaire. Camilla saw a grieving father, a widower lost in an endless, silent conversation with ghosts. She watched him with a heavy heart. She saw the minute flicker of pain in his eyes as he looked at the empty chair opposite him. She saw how his hand, resting on the table, would sometimes clench into a fist, the knuckles white with strain. The nightly egg he left behind was no longer a curiosity. It was a testament. One night it was a replica of the coronation egg, celebrating a legacy. The next, the rosebud egg, a symbol of new love. Each one told a piece of the story she now knew. Her knowledge became a burden. The professional distance she was supposed to maintain felt cruel. To treat him as just another customer, to be invisible, as Julian had instructed, felt like a betrayal of the profound grief she was now witnessing. She felt an overwhelming urge to let him know he wasn't just a ghost, that someone somewhere understood the language he was speaking. But what could she say? "My condolences on the loss of your family 7 years ago." It was unthinkable, intrusive. He was a powerful private man, guarded by a human fortress named Ivan. A single misstep could cost her the job she desperately needed. The internal battle raged within her. Her cautious, pragmatic side screamed at her to leave it alone, to just do her job. But the art historian in her, the part that believed in the power of symbols and stories to connect human souls, urged her to take the risk. He was speaking in a language of art and history. It was a language she spoke fluently. Perhaps she was the only person in his world who did. The tipping point came on a Tuesday night. It was a dreary, rain-lashed London evening. Alexei looked even more hollowed out than usual, the shadows under his eyes darker, his stillness more pronounced. When the time came, he placed the egg on the table. It was a beautiful, heartbreaking choice, a replica of the pelican egg. In an act of maternal love, the mother pelican on top of the egg would spread its wings to reveal a series of miniature portraits. It was a powerful symbol of parental sacrifice and devotion. Seeing it, Camilla made her decision. Fear warred with empathy, but empathy won. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror and resolve. This could go horribly wrong. He could have her fired. He could stare right through her. Or just, maybe he could feel seen. As he stood to leave, pushing his chair back with a soft, funereal scrape, Camilla moved. She didn't walk towards him, but placed herself subtly in his path to the exit, holding a silver tray as a prop. Ivan, ever vigilant, tensed immediately, his hand twitching inside his jacket. Alexei's gaze was fixed on the floor, ready to walk past her another piece of restaurant furniture. Camilla's voice was low, barely a whisper, but it cut through the ambient noise of the restaurant like a shard of glass. She didn't look at him, but at the empty table. "The pelican egg," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "A beautiful choice. The artist Mikhail Perkin designed it to symbolize selfless parental love." The world seemed to stop. Alexei froze mid-stride. It was as if she had spoken a word in a long-dead language that only he remembered. He slowly, very slowly lifted his head. For the first time, his stormy grey eyes didn't look through her but directly at her. The mask of indifference didn't just crack, it shattered. In its place was a raw, naked shock, followed by a wave of confusion and a flicker of something she couldn't name. Pain, hope. Ivan took a half-step forward, his expression thunderous. "Mr. Volkov is leaving." But Alexei raised a single, almost imperceptible hand, and Ivan stopped. The billionaire's gaze remained locked on Camilla. The silence stretched thick and heavy. The patrons at nearby tables, sensing a shift in the atmosphere, fell quiet. Julian across the room looked on with a horrified expression. Finally, a voice, raspy from disuse, spoke. It was deeper and softer than Camilla had imagined. "How?" he asked, the single word carrying the weight of 1,000 unanswered questions. "How do you know that?" Camilla finally met his gaze, her own eyes filled with a sad, simple honesty. "My master's is in Russian decorative arts," she said softly. "Fabergé is my specialty. The pelican egg. It was for the Dowager Empress, to remind her of her role in the charities she patronized, a mother to her people." She paused, taking the final terrifying leap, a symbol for a parent's undying love. A tremor went through Alexei Volkov's powerful frame. For a fleeting second, the composure he had maintained for 7 years crumbled, and the lonely, heartbroken man beneath was visible to the world. He swallowed hard, his throat working. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice strained. "Camilla." Camilla Jensen. He nodded slowly as if committing the name to memory. He looked from her to the table and back again. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out, Ivan following closely behind, who cast one last, bewildered look at the waitress who had just done the impossible. Camilla stood rooted to the spot, the silver tray shaking in her hands. She had spoken a single sentence, and in doing so had changed everything. The next night, an unnerving tension hung over Le Ciel Étoilé. Julian, the manager, cornered Camilla before her shift. "I don't know what you did, Miss Jensen," he hissed, his face pale with anxiety. "But you broke every rule. Mr. Volkov is our most important client. If he doesn't return, or if he complains, you're finished." Camilla could only nod, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. She had replayed the encounter 100 times in her mind, a pendulum of thought swinging between "I did the right thing" and "I've made a terrible mistake." At 8:00 p.m., the restaurant held its breath. Julian wrung his hands. Then, right on schedule, the imposing figure of Ivan appeared at the door, followed by Alexei Volkov. A collective silent sigh of relief rippled through the staff. Alexei took his seat at table 12. But this time something was different. He didn't stare blankly out the window. His gaze drifted around the room before settling for just a moment on Camilla. It was a brief, acknowledging glance, but it held a new awareness. When she brought the borscht, her hands were trembling. She set it down without a word, adhering to the rules, but as she turned to leave, his voice stopped her. "Miss Jensen." She turned back. "Yes, Mr. Volkov." "Stay," he said. It wasn't a request, but a quiet, simple command. He gestured to the empty chair opposite him. Camilla froze. In the corner of her eye, she saw Julian, frantically shaking his head, his expression one of pure panic. To sit with a guest was a fireable offense of the highest order, but to refuse Alexei Volkov felt like a far greater transgression. Looking into his expectant, lonely eyes, she made her choice. She pulled out the chair and sat down, her waitress apron, feeling like a ridiculous costume. For a long moment, they sat in silence. He didn't touch his soup. "The eggs," he finally said, his voice low and gravelly. "You know them all." "I know their history," she corrected gently. "Their stories." He nodded, looking down at his hands. "My daughter Anya. She loved the stories. We had a book. We would read it together every night. She would point at the pictures. She would ask me to tell her about the Tsar and his children. She dreamed of seeing them." Camilla's heart ached. She listened not as a waitress or even an art historian, but simply as a fellow human being. She didn't offer empty platitudes like, "I'm sorry for your loss." Instead, she offered him the only thing she could, a shared language. "The Standard Yacht egg," she said softly. Did she like that one, with the miniature gold replica of the imperial yacht that sailed on crystal waves? A world in a bottle? Alexei's eyes widened, a flicker of a long extinguished light returning to them. "Yes," he breathed. She called it the magic ship egg. She asked if we could build a ship like that. He paused, a ghost of a smile touching his lips for the first time. "I told her we would." The dam of his 7-year silence had been breached. The stories held back for so long began to flow, not in a torrent, but in a slow, painful trickle. Over the next few nights, the ritual changed. Camilla would bring the borscht, and then, at his quiet invitation, she would sit. He would tell her about Anya. He told her how the borscht was her favorite meal, how his wife, Elena, would make it on Sundays, the whole apartment, smelling of beets and dill. He was not eating the soup in the restaurant. He was trying to taste a memory. He would place the nightly egg on the table, and it would become their starting point. With the Romanov Tercentenary egg, he spoke of Onya's fascination with history, how she would pretend to be the Grand Duchess Anastasia, hiding from her enemies. With the winter egg, frosted with platinum and diamonds, he recounted a story of catching snowflakes on their tongues during a rare Moscow snowfall. Camilla in turn shared her knowledge. She gave him context historical footnotes that enriched his memories. She explained the symbolism he might have missed, the intricate work of the artisans, the private jokes and messages hidden within the jeweled shells. For the first time since the accident, Alexei was not just remembering his family. He was actively engaging with their memory in a way that felt constructive, not just painful. He was sharing them. Their conversations were a strange and beautiful tapestry, woven from a billionaire's private grief and a student's academic passion. He began to ask about her. Why Fabergé? What were her dreams? He listened with an intensity that few people had ever shown her. He saw past the apron to the sharp, empathetic mind beneath. One evening he was quieter than usual. He pushed the uneaten bowl of soup away and looked at her, his eyes clear and direct. "They think I am weak," he said, the statement hanging in the air. "My competitors, the board, they see this ritual, and they see a man who has lost his mind. What they see is a man speaking a language they don't understand," Camilla replied softly. He considered her words. "And you, Miss Jensen, what do you see?" Camilla met his gaze without flinching. "I see a father who refuses to let his daughter's memory fade into silence." A profound stillness settled over the table. Alexei Volkov, the Siberian wolf, the man who moved markets and intimidated governments, looked at the 24-year-old waitress and nodded a silent acknowledgement, passing between them. He was understood. In the hushed, expensive air of Le Ciel Étoilé, a fragile, unlikely friendship had taken root. But outside in the cutthroat world of international finance, the real wolves were beginning to circle, smelling the blood of a man they believed had finally lost his way. The whispers that had been confined to gossip columns began to solidify into headlines on the front pages of the Financial Times and the Wall Street Journal. Andrew Paul, the sharp-toothed CEO of Apex Acquisitions, had made his move. He launched an audacious, brutally public, hostile takeover bid for Volkov Industries. Paul was everything Alexei was not, loud, ostentatious, and media-savvy. He gave interviews on CNBC, his confident Ivy League accent, dripping with faux concern for Volkov Industries' shareholders. "We have a fiduciary duty to act," Paul declared, staring into the camera. "Alexei Volkov is a brilliant man, a legend. But legends fade. The company is adrift, rudderless, while its leader engages in, well, eccentric behavior. An empty chair at the board, meetings a full one at a restaurant every night. Shareholders deserve a leader who is present-focused and mentally sound." Paul's strategy was insidious. He wasn't just attacking the company's stock price. He was attacking Alexei's character, using his grief as a weapon. Anonymous sources, likely board members, swayed by Paul began leaking stories to the press. They spoke of Alexei's reclusiveness, his vacant stares in meetings, his refusal to engage in new ventures. And of course they spoke of the nightly ritual at Le Ciel Étoilé, framing it not as a memorial, but as the bizarre obsession of a deranged mind. A photo clearly taken with a hidden camera phone surfaced online. Alexei sitting alone at his table, the cold soup in front of him, his expression lost and empty. The caption read, "The Billionaire's Last Supper." The attack was having its intended effect. The stock price of Volkov Industries began to slide. Investors grew nervous. Members of the board, once fiercely loyal to the man who had made them all rich, started to waver. They respected Alexei, but business was business. Paul was offering them a generous buyout, a golden parachute from what looked like a sinking ship. An emergency board meeting was called to vote on Apex's offer. Alexei felt the walls closing in. The fragile peace he had begun to build with Camilla started to crumble under the immense pressure. He retreated back into himself. The stories he shared became fewer, his silences longer. The light that had flickered back to life in his eyes began to dim once more. He saw the company he had built, the legacy he had intended to leave for Anya being ripped away from him by vultures who were desecrating his mourning. One evening at the restaurant, he was visibly shaken. He barely looked at Camilla when she sat down. "They are winning," he said, his voice flat and defeated. "They are using my love for my family to destroy everything I built for them." He gestured dismissively at the borscht. "Paul is right. This is the behavior of a fool." "No," Camilla said, her voice firm, cutting through his despair. "It's the behavior of a father. You can't let him define what this means." "He already has." Alexei shot back, a flash of his old, cold anger returning. "The board will vote in 2 weeks. They will side with him. It is over. He will strip the company for parts and sell them off. Her legacy, our legacy, will be nothing but a footnote in a quarterly report." He looked utterly broken. The powerful Siberian wolf was gone, and in his place was a man drowning in a sea of loss, the sharks circling ever closer. He seemed ready to let the current take him, to give up the fight. Camilla watched him, her mind racing. She had stepped into his world and offered him a moment of understanding, a brief respite from his loneliness. But now that wasn't enough. Sympathy wouldn't save his company. Listening wouldn't defeat Andrew Paul. She thought of the stories he'd told her, of the fierce, brilliant little girl named Anya, who dreamed of magic ships and Tsarist history. What would that girl want her father to do? Would she want him to surrender? Or would she want him to fight Camilla? Looked at the powerful, defeated man across the table and realized her role in this story had to change. She could no longer be a passive listener, a gentle confidant. She had to be more. He had allowed her to understand his past. Now she had to help him fight for his future. The waitress had offered him comfort. The art historian, she realized, might just be able to offer him a weapon. The silence that followed Alexei's departure from the restaurant that night was heavier than any he had ever left in his wake. Camilla stood by the table looking at the untouched bowl of borscht and the exquisite miniature egg he had left beside it, a replica of the Tsarevich, crafted for Empress Alexandra to celebrate the birth of her long-awaited son, a symbol of a fragile, precious future. But tonight it felt like an offering of surrender. His words, "It is over," echoed in her mind, flat and final. She saw the future he was surrendering, Anya's legacy, the empire built in her name, all to be devoured by the cynical opportunism of Andrew Paul. A cold resolve settled over Camilla. For weeks she had been a confidant, a safe harbor, where he could speak the language of his grief. She had offered him the comfort of being understood, but comfort was a luxury now. What he needed was a weapon. Empathy would not win a boardroom war. She realized with chilling clarity that her role had to evolve. The waitress who listened had to become the strategist who acted. She would not let the memory of that little girl who loved stories be erased by a man who only understood numbers. Camilla called Julian the next morning and told him she was ill a lie that tasted like ash in her mouth, but was born of a desperate necessity. For the next 48 hours, her tiny London flat was transformed into a war room. The floor and table were buried under an avalanche of books, her familiar beloved texts on Russian history, and Fabergé were now juxtaposed with printouts from the Financial Times articles on corporate governance and case studies of famous hostile takeovers. Fueled by endless cups of tea, she dissected Paul's strategy. It was brutally simple. He was using Alexei's humanity against him. He had taken Alexei's most profound act of love and successfully branded it as a pathology, a symptom of corporate decay. Paul was fighting on a battlefield of perception. To fight back, Camilla knew they couldn't simply refute the perception. They had to create a new one, something so powerful and authentic that it would make Paul's narrative look cheap and hollow by comparison. Her eyes kept returning to the books on Fabergé. Why had the Tsars commissioned these eggs? They were not mere trinkets. They were complex instruments of legacy, personal messages of love and faith that also served as public decamelations of the dynasty's stability and divine right. They were intimate and imperial all at once. And that's when the idea struck her a spark that quickly ignited into a raging fire of inspiration. Paul was framing the ritual as a private obsession. The answer was not to hide it, but to make it profoundly, powerfully public. To take the intimate core of Alexei's grief, his love for Anya, and transform it into an imperial-scale statement of purpose. Legacy. The word pulsed in her mind. Not a legacy of the past, but a living, breathing one for the future. A foundation. She began to write, her fingers flying across the keyboard. The plan that emerged was audacious, a high-wire act of emotional and corporate jiu-jitsu. It used the very weight of Paul's attack to throw him off balance. It didn't deny the grief. It enshrined it at the very heart of the company's identity. On the third morning, armed with a slim folder containing her proposal and a conviction that burned away all fear, she put on the most professional dress she owned and took the tube to Canary Wharf. The Volkov Industries tower loomed over her, a glass and steel fortress, and for a moment her resolve wavered. She was a waitress about to storm the castle. Her first obstacle was the human equivalent of a fortress wall, Ivan. He met her in the lobby after she had been predictably stone-walled by the receptionist, his expression a mixture of confusion and stern disapproval. "Miss Jensen," he rumbled, his voice a low growl that could stop a charging bull. "This is not a restaurant. Mr. Volkov is not to be disturbed. He is preparing for the board meeting." "That's why I'm here, Ivan," Camilla said, her voice steady, meeting his intimidating gaze. "He's not preparing. He's surrendering. I was with him 2 nights ago. He's given up." Ivan's stony expression didn't change, but a flicker of something doubt-concern passed through his eyes. He knew she was right. "His reasons are his own." The bodyguard stated his loyalty absolute. "I know his reasons," Camilla countered, stepping closer. "And Andrew Paul is twisting them into a weapon to destroy him. You've spent years protecting him from physical threats, Ivan. This is a different kind of threat. It's an attack on his soul. Letting him surrender to it is the same as letting him walk into an ambush. I have a plan, a way to fight back. You have to let me see him." Ivan stared at her, his mind weighing years of protocol against the raw, undeniable sincerity in her eyes. He had seen the subtle change in his boss since this young woman had started sitting at his table. He had seen the light come back, only to be snuffed out by Paul's assault. She wasn't a threat. She was impossibly an ally. His duty was to protect Alexei Volkov, and he realized with sudden clarity that protecting him right now meant breaking the rules. "Follow me," he said, turning abruptly toward the private elevator. The penthouse office was a breathtaking space, a minimalist cathedral of success, with a panoramic view of the city Alexei had conquered. But the man himself seemed oblivious to his kingdom. He stood with his back to them, a dark silhouette against the sprawling cityscape, his posture radiating a profound and hollow defeat. "Ivan, I told you I wanted to be alone," he said, his voice flat, weary, devoid of its usual authority. "It's me, Mr. Volkov." Camilla said, her voice soft but clear in the vast, silent room. He turned slowly, and the look on his face was a painful mixture of shock, frustration, and deep, deep fatigue. "Camilla, you cannot be here. Leave, now." "No," she said, her voice gaining strength. She walked past him and placed her folder on the immense empty desk. "I'm not leaving, because you are standing in the heart of your empire, and you are letting a thief walk in and steal it from you. You are giving up, and I will not stand by and watch you do it. You don't understand the world you've walked into," he said, a bitter edge to his voice. "This isn't a history book. It's a shark tank. Then for God's sake, stop bleeding in the water and start acting like the shark everyone thinks you are." The words burst out of her, sharper and more passionate than she intended. The sheer force of her conviction made him flinch. "Paul is not attacking your balance sheets," she continued, her voice rapid, insistent. "He is attacking your story. He's taking your love for your daughter and calling it madness. So we are going to write a new story. A better one. A true one." She opened the folder. "He calls your ritual an obsession. We will call it the genesis of a foundation. He calls the eggs you leave for Anya meaningless trinkets. We will call them the inspiration for a global legacy. He calls you a man lost in the past. We will show them a man who is leveraging the deepest love from his past to build an unassailable future." Alexei stared at her, a dazed, uncomprehending look in his eyes. He shook his head. "A foundation, Camilla, this is sentiment. Paul deals in stock prices and power plays. And we will give him a power play he could never conceive of," she insisted, tapping the proposal. "The Anya Volkov Foundation. It will be the soul of this company. We will announce it at the emergency board meeting. We won't hide your grief, Alexei. We will turn it into a shield and a sword. You will stand before them, and you will tell them the truth, all of it. And then you will tell them how your love for your daughter has given you a new, greater vision for this company, a vision that invests in the future of the world." A flicker of light, the first spark of intellectual fire she had seen in days, appeared in his stormy grey eyes. He was no longer looking at her as a waitress, but as a strategist. He picked up the proposal, his hands tracing the logo she had designed. "You are turning their weapon back on them," he murmured, the strategic brilliance of it dawning on him. "We're changing the battlefield," Camilla confirmed, her voice now calm and certain. "Let Paul fight over share prices. You will fight for the soul of the company. You will offer them a choice, not between two CEOs, but between two futures, one of hollow corporate greed and one of profound, lasting purpose. Let's see which one a board of human beings chooses to back." Alexei looked from the papers in his hand to the young woman standing before him, her eyes bright with a fierce, unwavering belief in him. The fog of his despair began to recede, burned away by the heat of her conviction. The broken, grieving father began to recede, and the mind of the Siberian wolf, the builder of empires, whirred back to life, seizing upon this brilliant, unexpected strategy. A slow, dangerous smile touched his lips for the first time in a very long time. "You are not a waitress, Miss Jensen," he said, his voice imbued with a newfound awe and a chilling resolve. "No, Mr. Volkov," she replied, a small, triumphant smile playing on her own lips. "I'm not." The boardroom on the 80th floor of the Volkov Industries Tower was an arena built for titans, A single colossal table of polished obsidian reflected the cold grey London sky like a dark, still lake. Seated around it were the board members, a collection of shrewd, calculating minds who had ridden the wave of Alexei Volkov's genius to immense fortunes, and who were now poised to abandon him. Their faces were tense, their loyalties fractured. At the far end of the table holding court sat Andrew Paul. Dressed in a razor-sharp Italian suit, he radiated an almost feral confidence, a shark that had scented blood and was now circling for the kill. He had spent the morning methodically dismantling Alexei's legacy, using charts and projections to paint a picture of a rudderless company helmed by a psychologically unstable recluse. He knew he had the votes. The air was thick with the scent of a foregone conclusion. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors at the opposite end of the room swung open. A collective, almost imperceptible intake of breath rippled through the room. Alexei Volkov entered. He was not the haggard, broken ghost Paul had described. The weariness was gone from his eyes, replaced by a calm, focused intensity. His shoulders, which had seemed burdened by an invisible weight for years, were now set and straight. He moved with a deliberate, silent authority that commanded immediate attention. The Siberian wolf had not come to surrender. He had come to hunt. The board's surprise doubled as they saw he was not alone. Walking in step with him, her expression a mask of serene professionalism, was Camilla Jensen. She was transformed. Gone was the waitress's apron, replaced by an impeccably tailored charcoal suit. She carried a slim leather portfolio and moved with a quiet confidence that seemed entirely at odds with the woman who served soup. They took their places, Alexei at the head of the table opposite Paul and Camilla, in the chair directly behind him, an advisor's position. Paul let out a short, derisive laugh, unable to resist a jab. "Alexei, I was beginning to think you wouldn't show. And you've brought a friend. How nice. Here for moral support, are we, Miss—" He trailed off, dismissing her with a wave of his hand. Alexei's gaze, cold as a winter sea, settled on Paul. "Her name is Miss Jensen, and she is here as a chief architect of this company's future. A future you are not invited to be a part of." He then turned his attention to the board, his voice low, but carrying to every corner of the silent room. "Ladies and gentlemen, you have listened to Mr. Paul's compelling narrative this morning, a story of decay, of eccentricity, of a leader lost in the past. He has presented you with an image of me as a broken man, unfit to lead. He is not entirely wrong. I was broken." The admission hung in the air, a shocking display of vulnerability. "But where he sees weakness and madness," Alexei continued, "the truth is far simpler, and I owe you all an explanation. Mr. Paul has used my private grief as a corporate weapon. So today, I will lay that grief on this table for you all to see." For the next 10 minutes, Alexei Volkov did the unthinkable. He stripped away the armor of the ruthless billionaire and revealed the man beneath. With a raw, unflinching honesty, he told them about Elena and Anya. He spoke of their laughter, of their life together, and of the blinding, final horror of the car accident on that icy Swiss road. He spoke of the 7 years of silence that followed, a silence so profound he thought it would swallow him whole. "Mr. Paul is correct when he says I am obsessed," Alexei said, his eyes finding each board member in turn. "I am obsessed with the memory of my family. My nightly visits to Le Ciel Étoilé are not a descent into madness. They are a pilgrimage. It is the only way I have left to have dinner with my daughter." He explained it all. The borscht, the last meal his wife had promised to make for their little girl. The silence, a space he held for the voices he yearned to hear. And finally the eggs. Anya loved stories. Her favorite was a book about the imperial Fabergé eggs. They were her treasures, her magic. Each night I leave a miniature replica on the table. It is not a display of wealth. It is a message in a bottle to my little girl, telling her I remember, telling her that I am still her father. The boardroom, a place of ruthless financial logic, was now filled with the sacred weight of a father's sorrow. Sir Richard Allensby, the oldest member of the board, and a man who had known Alexei for 20 years, looked down at his hands, a deep feeling of shame washing over him for having believed Paul's cynical narrative. Paul, sensing the emotional tide turning against him with catastrophic speed, could no longer stay silent. "This is a deeply moving tragedy, Alexei, truly." He interjected, his voice slick with false sympathy. "But it has absolutely no bearing on Q4 profit margins or our stagnating R&D pipeline. The company needs a leader, not a storyteller. On the contrary, Andrew." Alexei countered, his voice dropping, becoming sharp and cold as steel. "This story is the very foundation of our future. You see, you look at my ritual and see an ending. I have been shown how to see it as a beginning." He nodded to Camilla, who touched a control on the table. The large screen behind Alexei, which Paul had used for his charts and graphs, flickered to life. It displayed a single elegant logo, a stylized A and V intertwined like the delicate lattice on a Fabergé egg. "I am officially announcing the formation of the Anya Volkov Foundation." Alexei declared, his voice ringing with a newfound power. "A new permanent and irrevocable charter for this corporation. Effective this quarter, 10% of Volkov Industries' net profits will be dedicated to funding its mission to identify and foster the next generation of brilliant minds in the arts and sciences. We will build research centers. We will fund scholarships. We will create a legacy not of minerals and microchips, but of human potential." He gestured with an open hand toward Camilla. This vision required an expert, someone with a unique understanding of how history, art, and legacy intertwine. Ms. Jensen's academic work in this field is unparalleled. It was she who showed me that my memories did not have to be a private shrine, but could be a public beacon. She has accepted the position of chief director and curator of the foundation. Her mandate is to turn this company's profits into a lasting tribute to my daughter's spirit. A wave of audible astonishment went through the room. This was not the desperate act of a broken man. This was a strategic masterstroke. It was a visionary move that would generate immeasurable global goodwill, redefine the company's public image, and attract a new echelon of talent eager to work for a corporation with a soul. It was a move that made Paul's talk of hostile takeovers and asset stripping seem small, greedy, and utterly profane. Alexei Volkov stood his full height, seeming to dominate the room. "So now you have a choice," he said, his final words landing with the weight of a judge's gavel. "Mr. Paul offers you a quick profit, a path of dissection and dissolution. I offer you a purpose, a legacy that will echo for a century. You can vote to sell the body of this company to a butcher, or you can vote to reinvest in its soul. The choice is yours." It was a checkmate. Paul's face, moments before, so smug, had contorted into a mask of disbelief, which quickly curdled into pure, impotent rage. He had been utterly and completely outmaneuvered, not by a better financial offer, but by a story he had been too cynical to understand. The vote was a mere formality. One by one, the board members, led by a visibly moved Sir Richard, announced their unwavering support for Alexei. Paul slammed his laptop shut, gathered his papers with trembling hands, and stormed from the room without another word, leaving the lingering stench of his defeated ambition behind him. Later, as the sun set, casting long golden rays across the London skyline, Alexei and Camilla stood before the vast window in his office. The victory was quiet, profound. "What you did today, Camilla," Alexei said, his voice quiet, with an emotion that went far beyond gratitude. "You didn't just save my company. You showed me how to stop being a ghost. You gave my daughter's memory a voice that the entire world will now hear." Camilla looked out at the sprawling city, a world of infinite stories. "She had the voice all along," she replied softly. She just needed someone to translate. Alexei Volkov was no longer the silent man at table 12, and Camilla Jensen was no longer just a waitress. They were partners architects of a new legacy. Together they had stared into an abyss of grief and had not turned away. Instead, they had built a bridge across it, forged from the unbreakable love of a father, and illuminated by the light of a little girl's enduring story. The story of Alexei and Camilla is a powerful reminder that behind every public facade there is a private truth. A man the world saw as a cold, broken billionaire was in reality a father consumed by a love that could not die. And the woman who seemed to be just a waitress was the one person with the knowledge and empathy to see the truth. Their story shows us that understanding is a superpower. It proves that the deepest wounds can be transformed into the greatest strengths, and that sometimes the key to saving a life or a legacy is simply taking the time to learn the language of another person's heart. If this story moved you, please take a moment to hit the like button and share it with someone who might appreciate it. These stories of human connection are what we love to tell. To make sure you don't miss our next video, click the subscribe button and ring the notification bell. And in the comments below, tell us, have you ever misjudged someone